holidays, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Kate Frankfurt. I am the Chief Philanthropy Officer of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. And on behalf of our CEO, Stacy Caldwell, who sends regrets tonight and unable to join us, I want to thank you for joining our Forest Futures Salon, Cultural Burning, and Prescribed Fire. The 2021 fire season was one of the worst on record, with 2.5 million acres burned across California. It was a season that began 2 months earlier than usual due to drought conditions. 3 of our state's largest wildfires occurred in 2021, with the Dixie and Caldor fires forcing evacuations in neighboring counties. The behavior of those fires was different than what was expected. The fires jumped to rain we had thought would serve as a break. The idea that fire has a season is now also in question, with the Colorado fire in Big Sur currently burning and the Marshall Fire between Boulder and Denver, Colorado, devastating that community with over 900 homes destroyed just last month. Despite December's overwhelming snowfall here in the Tahoe area, California has not yet beaten back its drought, and wildfire is now a year-round threat here in the West. As a community, we are not ones to sit back and wait. And I am thrilled to introduce Forest Futures, a dynamic and transformational initiative of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, of which this monthly Wildfire 101 series is a part. Before we get to Vikki, Preston, and Zeke Lunder, and what I know will be an amazing conversation, I want to let you know a little bit about the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. TTCF has been around for more than 23 years. We are one of over 800 community foundations in the United States. We are a grant maker, a collaborator, a convener. We connect people and opportunities, generating resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community. I want to take a moment tonight to recognize board and staff from TTCF. We have our board chair with us this evening, Hannah Sullivan, and a number of our TTCF staff members who work on initiatives across topic areas. So thank you all for joining us. In addition to grant making to our local nonprofits and providing scholarships to local students, we focus specific attention to initiatives such as family strengthening through the Community Collaborative of Tahoe Truckee, our local housing crisis through the Mountain Housing Council, and forest health through Forest Futures. Climate-focused grant making is something we've been involved with for more than 10 years through our Nature Fund, and we're proud to have distributed more than $1 million to support local nonprofits. For the past 4 years, TTCF has convened experts to help deepen our own understanding of wildfire, and we are proud to have launched our Forest Futures initiative. This bold, entrepreneurial, and holistic impact strategy identifies, builds, accelerates, and scales the solutions we need to help to protect our community from catastrophic wildfire. Our Forest Futures salons, of which this is one, have been integral in shaping that strategy, and now in helping to educate and build community engagement around this important issue. And with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator for the evening, Nicole Litkamuller, who is Program Director for Forest Futures, and who will also moderate tonight's Q&A. And with that, I turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and especially to Zeke and Vikki for being our presenters tonight on this very important topics of these 2 types of fire that are very crucial to solving or helping solve our wildfire issues. Just a couple pieces of information about the Q&A session that I'll just state now and I'll repeat again later when we get there. But we ask that people type questions into the chat, and then I'll be tracking the chat both while our presenters are speaking and then after they're done speaking when we kind of move into the Q&A session. So feel free to type questions into the chat during their presentations. But just know that we won't answer questions until they're done, and we're in like that Q&A session towards the end, and we'll kind of work through questions as they come in and as they're relevant to the topics that were presented, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question that you posed in the chat. But again, feel free to put those in the chat during the presentation so you don't forget them. And then we ask you to just keep yourself muted unless you are asking a question. And with that, I would like to introduce our 2 speakers tonight. We have Vikki Preston, and Vikki is a cultural resources technician for the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources in Orleans, California. She works in archaeology, traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous land management, and indigenous resilience and sovereignty. And Vikki is also a basket weaver, gatherer, and community member. Zeke started Deer Creek Resources in 2011 and built it into a wildfire analysis and mapping company, and then handed over leadership of the company in 2017, but continues to work with Deer Creek Resources to help lead prescribed fire training exchanges with the Trucks program, and provides wildfire management and prescribed fire consulting for public agencies and private landowners. And Zeke also started the Lookout website during the Dixie Fire this past summer, when he realized that Twitter, Facebook, and other fire information pages weren't really working to tell the kinds of stories and information that needed to get out about fires as they were happening. So we're very excited to have both of these speakers tonight. And I think I will kick it off to Zeke to start us off first, and then we'll have Vikki follow up after you.
All right. Thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here, and glad that you guys are starting this series to dig deeper into forestry and fire issues. Appreciate all the support from the viewers too. You know, we started to look out during the Dixie Fire and got a lot of support from people in Tahoe Basin and Plumas County, and that's allowed me to have a little bit more time to spend on media projects on video and on kind of the storytelling around what we're doing around prescribed fire. In my work, I've been working with prescribed fire since kind of the mid-90s when I worked for the Forest Service, and we would burn slash after logging and to prepare areas for tree planting. And also we did some burning to as part of the early phases of the Quincy Library Group project, which was a big initiative to look at landscape scale fire hazard reduction. And so throughout my career, I've had a chance to work with people who are kind of keeping prescribed fire alive. As you're going to hear from Vikki, her people have managed to keep their burning traditions alive against the wishes and under huge oppression from people that have tried to take fire away from Native people. People have tried to take fire away from foresters and the Forest Service too. And so I've been lucky to work in the past 25 years with people that are keeping the culture of prescribed burning alive in the agencies. And a lot of the people in the agencies are keeping prescribed burning going, are doing it against the momentum and the priorities of their agencies. And so I'm grateful to be part of that. So I think just to start off a little, talking about prescribed fire. What is prescribed fire? Why do we call it prescribed? The idea is that we have a prescription that we're burning under, which is a set of environmental parameters. And those are based on science and observation and the effects we want. So we know that if we burn on a day that's 70 degrees and 40% humidity, and we have 10 tons of pine needles per acre, and the wind's blowing 2 miles an hour, we're going to generate flames that are 3 feet tall. We know that if we do it when it's 100 degrees and the wind's blowing 20 miles an hour, that the flames are going to be ups in the tops of the trees. And unless our objective on that day is to kill all the trees, then we probably won't meet them. I'm going to show a couple videos here just about the work we're doing, and just to give you a taste of what some good fire can look like. And here we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
So tell me what you're doing out here today.
Burning stuff.
Like what?
We're burning this ponderosa, mostly forest. We're trying to get rid of the fuel, and we're trying to not kill the cedar, the Doug fir, or especially not the sugar pine.
And how come you don't want to kill those?
Because I guess they're kind of rare trees, and there's a ton of other different like ponderosa trees, and there's only a few of those other trees.
Okay.
My job today is to put out burning stuff.
That's on the wrong side of the line?
Yes, like burning trees, burning stumps under like trees, and just like put out stuff.
All right. What do you think of prescribed burning?
Very fun.
So what are you learning today, like that you didn't know before today?
I didn't know that a head fire with like drip torches could be so volatile to trees that we want to protect uphill because all the heat is rising into those trees and killing them.
Looks like this guy wants to come through.
Let's go.
All right.
Watch your stuff.
Okay. So these are scenes from a project we're doing right now with the Butte County Prescribed Burn Association, or PBA. PBAs are kind of a new thing getting started in California. They're modeled on work that's been done in the South and the Southeast of the United States, where landowners get together and share equipment and resources and know-how to burn down there. And so Butte County Resource Conservation District has a watershed coordinator grant, and they were able to write in work to facilitate the beginning of a new PBA. And that's helped to pay people like myself to go out and provide guidance and kind of coaching to landowners on how to get burning done. This guy I'm talking to here is a trainee fire effects monitor. So we're training people using the national standards for fire qualifications. And his job is to take weather observations and record them, and then to write a report on the fire effects and whether or not we met them. His job also is if, the burn's too hot and we're killing too many trees, or the burn's not hot enough and we're just kind of wasting fuel, is to communicate that back to the burn boss, and just to kind of be an ecological monitor. We've got students out there. There's a grad student who's working on a wildfire or on a wildland management degree at Chico State. She also works for the Paradise Parks and Recreation District. And basically what we're looking at this land as being is the landowner's done a lot of prep work here, thinning and pile burning over the past, say 10 years. And that's creating kind of a safe kind of sandbox, we'd say, for us to let people play with fire, right? Like the fire is the best teacher, and people really have extremely limited exposure to fire in this really useful form. We're used to seeing big flames taking over the TV screen and scary bad fire. So, to have a place where we can give people with really limited experience time with good fire in a kind of controlled place where we've got a nice kind of safe treated area. That's one of the real goals of the PBA. And a lot of what we're doing as the kind of leaders in this group is trying to identify opportunities where we have, where we can kind of minimize the risk of fire escaping through kind of our knowledge of fire behavior and kind of how fires work at the landscape scale. So I've spent the last 25 years working on management of major wildfires, and we've learned a lot about a sequence in which you can light the land on fire that really minimizes the risk. So I think I'll talk about that for a second here. This is the area that we're burning in these videos. This is near Forest Ranch, and it's kind of a unique spot in that it's some of the lowest elevation ponderosa pine forest in the foothills around here. And right over here, when I talked about kind of looking at big picture, like the blue is the campfire. So campfire burned through Paradise. It almost got into Chico, and it kind of petered out with the winds and firefighting before it got to Forest Ranch. So what we're doing here is, because the campfire just burned this whole area and there's still bulldozer lines and everything, there's a lot of reduced fuels, and we're not worried about losing the fire into the burned area because it's all black, and we reduced all the flashy fuels in there into campfire. The landowner has done a ton of thinning on his land, and so we kind of tackled this in a sequence where we started right below his house and we burned the slope here, and we weren't really worried about it going up the hill.
Well, it's actually about using.
Okay, so the sequence in which we kind of put fire on this landscape is important. We're not going to start fire down here at the bottom of the hill before we've started at the top, because then we could lose the fire up the hill. So a lot of what we're doing here in how we lay out these units and where we put control lines and everything is strategic, in that we're going to light this and then we're going to light this next, or we'll burn this unit before we burn another unit that could run up the hill. So in general, we want to start towards the top of the hill and work our way down from there. and deprive fire of an opportunity to run away on us. And so then at the larger landscape scale, the thinking here is that if we can build kind of what we would call a catcher's mitt, continue to work off what we've already got black, eventually we might have opportunity to burn larger, more inaccessible areas that are impossible to treat by hand or with equipment. So a lot of what we talk about when we talk about scaling up prescribed burning is just about looking at the whole landscape, being strategic, using, there's control lines out here from the campfire, dozer lines, there's reduced fuels. We're trying to take that all into consideration as we build a strategy to burn on the landscape. I think an important thing to come back to, though, about the PBAs is that when you look at this, we did a ton of work last year and we burned, 35 acres. And then you zoom out to the landscape scale and that's just nothing. It's like this teeny little dot on this fire-prone landscape. And that we're not going to change the outcome here of our problem with the fire with 10 acre unit, 20 acre here. Even if someone does a 100-acre burn, the scale of the problem is that we got 30 million acres in California that have problems with wildfire. So these burns are great for building capacity of the people, giving people a different experience with fire that isn't revolving around death, destruction, and big flames on the news. But it's not going to solve our problems. I don't think many of us think that we're going to burn enough here in the foothills to save Forest Ranch from being destroyed by wildfire. I don't think that we're going to burn enough to save Cohasset. We're going to burn in Cohasset this weekend. It's too little too late. There's too many people living out here. The windows are too small. The season that we have to burn safely is too narrow. We can't, for example, at this place, we can't really get the north slopes burned because we can't burn until we've had rain. And once we have rain, these north slopes are in the shade and the oak leaves are wet and they won't dry out until summer and we won't be able to burn. So there's these really real limits to the scale issues. But I think the benefit is that we're giving people, it's helping repair the human fabric of the landscape. It's helping neighbors work together. It's giving an example of what can work when we've got construction company owner working with the pot growers live next door, with the hippies down the road, with the university people, with the agency people. So many of our fire problems are social problems. I just pulled up, this summer, the Dixie Fire was threatening my hometown of Westwood. And, a lot of these towns just have, Greenville, even Quincy, there's just real problems with deep poverty, limited capacity in the community to do anything. And prescribed burning is not going to solve that. But if we can build some economy around forest restoration, we can help repair these communities. Prescribed fire is part of that. I think one of the more exciting things about the PBA is that the government's role in it is pretty minimal. I mean, we're getting a little bit of funding. The CAL FIRE comes out and they bring fire engine and they're under instructions not to do anything except be there in case we lose it. And it's, the agencies aren't getting it done, right? They're talking a lot about prescribed burning and they're not getting it done. The Forest Service is burning, for lucky tens of thousands of acres a year when they manage tens of millions of acres. And so we do have to build this local capacity. And some people have a vision that with all these heavy fire seasons, that the firefighters are just going to put their heads down and work and keep responding to these catastrophic fires. And then 5 or 10 years from now, they're going to raise their head up when they catch a breath, and they're going to find that there's an entire civilian community of burners that have sprung up while they were too busy putting fires out. And so the PBAs are part of that movement. And I think in some ways it's kind of a revolution, right? That to claim ownership of fire, like since when does CAL FIRE, the BLM, Forest Service, when did we decide that they owned the use of fire? Landowners have a right to use it. And why do we have to ask permission, if we can do it safely? So we have a long ways to go with that, but the act of managing your own land is almost a revolutionary thing at this point. And you know, when you look at how much work it takes to do CEQA and NEPA, you know, waiting for public money means that it'll never get done. So prescribed burning is an affordable tool that we may be able to use at scale on private land without asking for public money. And if we don't have to ask for public money, we don't have to do CEQA, and we might actually get something done. Right now we're burning in the fall and in the winter if it's dry. So like I said, we've got some opportunities to burn here in Cohasset this weekend. I'm really glad that we've got Vikki here to talk about cultural burning. I think one of the tough things for me about doing this work is that laying fire on the landscape is a heavy responsibility, and it's kind of a heavy, spiritually a heavy thing to do in outside of kind of a cultural context. And so we have a lot of people who come out with us who've never put fire on the ground. We put fire on the ground, and when you put fire on the ground, there's a lot of life and death. You know, you're killing scorpions and wood rats and killing millions of plants and small trees. And ideally, like you evolve an understanding of that trade-off of the life and death that you're dealing with. But it's intense work, and doing it without kind of a grounding in the landscape and without knowledge, deeper knowledge of what you're doing, it's hard for us white people. And I think a lot of us who are in the fire business, in suppression and in prescribed burning too, like there's a lot of trauma that we have to deal with in our community. You know, there's just firefighter mental health is really emerging now as the real topic. And prescribed fire is part of that. You know, this is really intense work to do. We had a near miss with a vehicle accident on one of these burns, and a kid almost died. He didn't even really get hurt, but it just raised that awareness for all of us who are out here doing this work, is that this stuff needs to happen in a cultural context, in a container of some sort that helps us all, that supports us. And so when I look at like the scale of the problem, as a community, as a culture, we've created this terrible problem on our landscape with fuels and with fire hazard, and now we're suffering these catastrophic losses. But when it comes down to resolving it, the liability is all put upon people like me who are out here burning because we want to see it happen, but with no support from the agencies and very little legal protection. Like, it's impossible for prescribed burn bosses right now to get liability insurance in California. So that puts all that weight of lighting the match on someone who just really wants to see it get done. Who covers liability right now? Nobody, right? It's like the liability's on the landowner. We've got some new legislation that is probably going to have to go to court to prove whether or not it actually provides protection to landowners. But it's sitting on the top of us who light the match. And we're doing it because we have a commitment to seeing the work get done. But we're really, you know, at this point, we're really hanging ourselves out there to get it done. And that's to me, that when you hear people talk about liability, you got the institutional liability where you don't want to write a grant and support a project that starts a burn that gets away and starts the next campfire. But it really comes down to like who lit the match and put it on the ground. There's no protection for us right now, and it's enough to you know, I don't know if I'll continue in this work until we can figure that out. So it's a real obstacle on just about every level. And at this point, it's like the liability is with the people who are brave enough to ignore it and take on a project because we think we've mitigated it as best we can. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Great, thank you so much, Zeke. Vikki, we'll just kick it right over to you to jump on into giving us your perspective on cultural burning, and then we'll kind of circle back. I have some questions to ask both of you to get us started, and then we have been getting some questions in the chat from the audience, and we'll go to those at the end. Go ahead, Vikki.
Ayuki. Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks, Zeke. It was really good to hear, you know, and learn more about some of the burning y'all been doing down there, and see some some videos and pictures. I always appreciate seeing other burners in other parts of the world, even, but the state and local, we stay pretty isolated in this area, but it is cool to see different landscapes. I've never actually burned anywhere else but here, because there's always so much work to do here. But I know we've talked about burning other places, and there's so many different fuel types out there. And I think, like, as somebody who, as an Indigenous person who really appreciates the landscape and plants and ecological diversity, and I think that is really exciting for me, to see stuff like that. And that person's like rake was really interesting looking. It looked a little homemade. I was kind of curious about that too. Yeah, I didn't really prepare a presentation. Been a little busy. I have some videos. I guess I could screen share and maybe show one. I just
Sure.
kind of pulled it up. Yeah, I'll just like kind of play it while I'm talking. Do you know how do you
Yeah.
start share?
That.
If there is sound, you will need to check the box that says share sound.
Okay. Yeah. Ooh. Where's the... Okay. Yeah, this was just one of the, can folks see this?
Yeah.
This is just one of the burns that we've done here in Orleans, and also just kind of to give some context of where I'm at, far northern California, Oregon, almost to the Oregon border. Ecological Aboriginal territory is along the Klamath River, which you can kind of see in the video. This is just a time lapse of one of our burns that happened at Tishonik, which is actually a ceremonial area here near Orleans for the Kuduk tribe. And we have ceremonial areas and villages all along the Klamath River, and the tribe here and folks here have kind of maintained our inhabitants here. And we've as a lot of Indigenous people in California, we've always been here, and we've always had practices like burning happen in these landscapes. And so I grew up here, and my family lives in these various areas in this video, actually. And basically I got introduced to burning just from like growing up and doing it with my family in different places. And so I kind of grew up in a place where I saw burning in the same place over, the years and the changes that you have when you burn in the same exact place for year after year. And we were always burning with like specific purposes. And I think that that's one thing about prescribed burning for me or for other Indigenous folks, is that often our objectives, Zeke talked about prescriptions and, prescribing, and you're kind of like your burn objectives. And for Indigenous people, a lot of times that is tied to different cultural uses, ceremonial uses. And I think that, for example, like down here at the ceremonial grounds, there is a big like element of like protection of the town and the ceremonial areas from like wildfire, but there's also an importance to burning the willow in that area for the basket weavers. It's a really accessible place for multiple generations, elders, youth, and folks who have a hard time getting around, or maybe folks who just don't have like four-wheel drive to get in crazy places. It's a really great place for the community to go. And I'm not sure. Can y'all hear the sound on that?
Yeah, you're good.
I was just gonna I'll just let that play in the background, I guess. This is like videos that, and Zeke knows Stormy Stotts, who does, she's done a lot of video production for our treks, our Klamath treks that we have up here, the Prescribed Fire Training Exchange. which is where I met Zeke at. And she often has done a lot of videos around like folks that come to visit during treks, and just kind of like getting the word out about what we're doing up here. The prescribed fire training exchange that we do locally, and basically all prescribed fire locally here for us is always done in conjunction with the tribes. We have multiple tribes here, and we all have like a strong connection with burning and in various forms. And so we have, and like I was talking about before, we have a lot of burn objectives that are culturally centered. We have basket weavers, we have ceremonial community, we have like those specific ecosystem purposes that we maintain and have a responsibility to be a part of as Indigenous people. So we participate in the training exchanges, and we have folks that are red carded. We have folks that work in fire, but then also something that is a little bit different for us too is like having community members who are also just around to give feedback and give like the year-round advising about like where we need to be burning, where there's gathering areas need to get burned. That's all stuff that we talk about all year round and try and put that into prioritization for where we're burning. So we are trying to burn at larger scales. We are trying to like return fire to this landscape that's been really hit hard by fire suppression. But we're also trying to like really support the social impacts, socioeconomic impacts of the community. As Indigenous people, we've since colonization, a lot of the land here is not, tribal ownership, but most of it is Forest Service ownership. And so like 98% of it. So the tribe, we don't have like a reservation. So we are pushing for burning on public lands as well as private lands. And we have to create so many different partnerships to do that. And it's extremely complicated. And that's the work that we are doing. Like, for example, today was going to look at areas that Forest Services wanted to do management in. And we went up to look at those previously burned areas so that we can have like kind of opinions about and give feedback to the local Forest Service, because it's important that we give our opinions and with that we are heard. Yeah.
Can I ask you a couple questions about a couple things, just clarifying questions that you've mentioned real quick? One of them was, how often do you guys typically burn the same area, or do you try to burn the same area? Because you mentioned kind of repetitive burning. And also, how receptive is the U.S. Forest Service to burning on their lands? It's been kind of like it's been an experience over the years. I mean, I've only been burning, in my lifetime. I think even it's changed a lot with the U.S. Forest Service here locally. The tribe sits on 2 different national forests, with the Klamath National Forest and the Six Rivers National Forest. So it's changed a lot. Different people, different relationships. I think right now things are like becoming easier to burn, but it's still like becoming also it's still very hard. And a lot of that is just kind of like with climate change and like the increased intensity of fires. I know Zeke talked about burn windows, and just like also just like getting permits and getting crossing all of those boxes to getting like the legal stuff and the permitting done is very hard. And we run into different hurdles with different stuff outside of that also. Community sentiment, but mostly I feel like a lot of times we're running into like different management prescriptions overlapping, that there's usually like, there's always seems like there's something that's like, we can't burn because of endangered species stuff here, or like a previous burn that happened there and you have to wait a while.
there's a lot of that comes up, and a lot of times during the good burn windows, there's some reason why we can't burn. And so I think that we've been working a lot with the Forest Service to burn, but I also think that there's a lot more work that can be done. And I think that that's one of the things that we strive for every day, is to, you know, try and build those conversations and build those relationships so that we can do more burning and get into folks' like places that are really important to them, because their families have lived there since time immemorial, like in the same exact villages for that entirety of that time. So
you just mentioned that on Forest Service land, there's limitations on how often you can burn, but earlier you were also talking about that you repetitively burn on what I'm assuming is private land. Is that correct?
It's a lot easier to burn on private land repetitively, yeah.
And how often would you, like, what is your traditional aim for that repetition? What's that cycle look like for you guys at the, you know, ideal situation of what you can do?
You know, a lot of that kind of depends on also what kind of vegetation types we're looking at and what kind of fuel loading you're looking at. So like, you know, like for like the property I live on, for example, like there's different oak woodlands that it is good to burn those every year. And then there's different areas where it's easier for us to burn it like every couple of years. So it kind of, a lot of that kind of depends on knowledge of what vegetation and kind of like the fuels that you have there, and knowledge of like a lot of that, it comes from folks who've lived in that same place for a long time, and you can kind of like know how quickly things are going to grow back and what kind of effects the burning is going to have on the fuel that is there with you. But I'd also like to point out that you know, with colonization, and part of the effects to Indigenous people here is that not a lot of Indigenous people here own land. So not only do we have Forest Service land that's not, you know, tribal land, but most Indigenous people here don't own land. So the whole private property thing is also hard as an Indigenous person, because it means having to build more relationships and burning on land that you're hoping that you can gather on and stuff later too. So as an Indigenous person, like pushing for burning, you have to like jump all those hurdles of like having been dispossessed of land over the years, but all of the millions of acres that we still see as tribal land is like, you know, we're responsible for this, and so we do have to like look for ways to get it burned.
Great, thanks. I think if you're okay with it, Vikki, I'd love to bring Zeke back kind of up on the screen with you and maybe start to jump into some of the questions that you can both address for us. Does that work for you?
Sure, and it can stop sharing.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So we've gotten quite a few questions in the chat. I'm still going to start off with a couple that I kind of came up with as you both were talking, and then we'll start asking participants to unmute themselves and ask their question from the chat, and we'll get through as many as we can. If we don't get to everyone's questions, we can have you email them to us, and we can try to get Vikki and Zeke to answer them via email as well. But to start off, I think the biggest things that I kind of picked up on that I think you both mentioned is how do you guys see the impacts of climate change on the ability to do this prescribed burning, and do you think that trend is going to continue of smaller burn windows, and how do we kind of work with that, knowing that we need to keep doing more burning?
I think we need to burn during fire season, right? Like if you look at the Dixie Fire or the Caldor Fire, like large proportion of those fires burned with beneficial severity, right? So even though we had 2.5 million acres burned in California, you know, probably at least half of that burned with a beneficial severity. And we've had fires in August in Butte County in 2020 that burned with beneficial severity. So we've got this idea that because we're in July or August, that somehow fires are all going to be devastating and we're only going to get bad fire out of it. But there's opportunities to burn during those times, especially in conjunction with managing large wildfires. And we have to broaden our understanding of prescribed fire. Our current branding of prescribed fire, you know, like I worked with a nature conservancy in South Carolina, and they had a whole team of kind of public information officers there from TNC. And they are telling us, when you take your photos, like, we want flames that are like this tall. You know, like if you have flames that are like up to your waist, we're not going to show them because people think that's scary. And so we've spent all this time telling people prescribed fire, it's all about these little baby flames that you can like put out with your shoe. And prescribed fire could be, you know, the problem is that we've got way too many trees in the forest, right? We've got way too many trees, like 6 times or something, like way too many trees in the forest. And we need to kill lots of them, right? And you can't kill these overstocked trees with 6-inch tall flames. And so, one, we have to start telling a better story about the severity we're getting from the wildfires that we're experiencing. And 2, we have to admit that we can't control these big wildfires, and that fires burned in the summer in the past. And we're not going to take all the land in California and do some underburning and suddenly have like healthy forests again. We're like kind of in a reset mode. And so as far as I can tell, like, we don't have a choice in it. That's completely unrealistic that it's going to happen, that Cal Fire is going to let us start like lighting the forest on fire in August. But that's just kind of my take on it, is that we need to do more in season burning, and we need to broaden our understanding, and we need to stop seeing dead trees as a failure when we do a prescribed burn. Because if we were going to come in with logging equipment at the end of forest, we'd kill a ton of trees. You just wouldn't see them. But if we kill them with prescribed burns, somehow it's a failure.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Zeke said. And I think of like prescribed burns that are specifically targeting like meadow restoration, you know, and encroaching of trees that are, you know, reducing the size of meadows. You know, a lot of times like that top kill and that reduction of tree population is extremely important. We live in an area around here where I live. It's very much like a lot of times like our objectives are to kill some trees, because since fire suppression, there has been like huge increase in those populations, which also lead to really can help catastrophic wildfire burn. And that's from having visited areas where there's been prescribed burning, where there has been dead trees. But when you visit places that have burned really hot in like catastrophic wildfire, you're talking like totally nuked. It's different. It's a different kind of like dead tree area. So it's different. And you know, some of the areas I went today in the Slater Fire and Happy Camp, you know, there's some stuff coming back, but it's very different than, you know, wildfire or prescribed burning that's you know, on the hotter end. So yeah, I'd say that climate change is definitely something that we've had a lot of conversations about, even just today, talking about, you know, right now, there's definitely prescribed burning that's going to be happening this week up here too. So, you know, we're in winter, we're in January, and we have, you know, these kind of really dry conditions after that snow we had. It's completely kind of flipped. And so it's cold, it's dry, it's windy, it's frosty. It's, you know, people are burning right now. There's oak woodlands that are pretty like dry and crunchy right now. So I think climate change is just throwing different things at us. And I think that we need to be able to adjust to it. And I think that that's, you know, that it is important to like open our possibilities for burn windows. You know, right now, like a lot of agencies don't have, you know, they're going through hiring. There's less people working right now, but what we need is people working also to be doing prescribed burning, and not just have folks like all prepared just for wildfire season. We need to have folks prepared for also other times a year too, when we could be burning, and just really going after those burn windows when they present themselves. And like Zeke was saying, during fire season also. So yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's an increasing need for more of a year-round fire crews, and maybe there's a way to, you know, utilize those crews in the winter to help get more of the prescribed burning done. And then in the summer, it'd be on the kind of firefighting side of things.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to your question real quick, is like one thing about adjusting to climate change is I think we need to look at burning bigger units and taking advantage of the things that are happening with climate change. So here's the Dixie Fire, and this whole area outside of Chester, like 100,000 acres burned really hot. And then we've got like areas in here that didn't really burn at all, like thousands of acres that underburned. And that creates opportunities for prescribed burning. Like we can come in here now and we can burn this area potentially under pretty dry, hot conditions in a few years to clean up what's been initiated by getting fire back in here where it killed a lot of small trees with a really minimal risk of losing it on the landscape scale because it's contained by a lake and a huge hot burn that goes for thousands and thousands of acres. So we've got this whole new landscape. Like if you look at the Dixie Fire in 1 million acres, we've got this whole new landscape to manage. That there's a lot of opportunities to put fire back into this landscape now to make sure that the trees that survive the Dixie Fire will survive the next fire.
Yeah.
So, but you know, I think if you think of like, I want to accomplish 100,000 acres of burning. Do I want to do that in 10,000 10-acre burns where each one of those is something that has a potential to escape? Do I want to do it in 100-acre burns? Do I want to do it in 10 1,000-acre burns? Like the larger the burn you do, the less exposure you have. It's kind of counterintuitive, but as far as like mobilizing firefighters, doing a big project, mopping it up, if we keep doing these little teeny projects, we don't accomplish anything at the landscape scale. And every time we light the match, we're adopting risk. So climate change is just we've got a whole new chessboard, and a lot of the ways we've thought about things in the past need to be readjusted to this new reality, this new forest that we're managing.
Great, thanks you guys. There was a question that came up early in the chat that kind of was related to what you were just speaking about, Zeke, from Alyssa Fogg about burning into old wildfire scars and if that helps build resilience in those areas. Is that kind of what you were just getting out of, you know, some of those areas where there are still trees standing, you can go in and even though the fire did go through there, you can still go in and do more burning to make it even more resilient? Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, and I think it's one of our only options in a lot of ways. You know, the Dixie Fire, the mill in Quincy was already full of logs from the Bear Fire from last year. And Collins Pine has burned so many logs it would take them 10 years to cut it at their mill. And none of the other mills need logs. So we're going to have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of burnt forest that doesn't get logged where there's standing dead trees. And fire is a tool that we can put back in there to manage that land as those trees fall, as the branches come down. We can be on a schedule putting fire in there. And it might be one of the ways that otherwise we let this stuff all fall down for 30 years and a bunch of little trees grow up and then it burns again. It burns out the little trees also. So the burned areas need as much management as the unburned areas in a lot of ways.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to go to a question from the audience now from Michael Pickard. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question that you typed into the chat there.
Sure. You could just read the question. I asked, I'd love to hear how the objectives differ, if at all, between a cultural burn and an agency-led prescribed burn.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like a cultural prescribed burn, or a burn done, I guess more specifically, like a prescribed burn that's done with objectives that that are centering like tribal objectives, tribal community objectives. You know, you could actually put those into the burn plans for the burns. And a lot of times, a lot of the objectives in a burn plan do meet a lot of cultural objectives. I mean, fire itself is always good. It's usually good for a lot of cultural plants, but having those conversations with tribal community to also learn that about other objectives that can be benefited from burns, like for example, like you know, the mortality of certain trees in areas where there's cultural plants that need tree reduction or something, or specifically like trying to clear a certain amount of brush so that hopefully people can get in there and gather. I think that, you know, putting those parameters in is really easy, and it just takes that communication and the communication with tribal community and folks, and then that, you know, implementing the burn plan is something that you know, fire folks are pretty accustomed to doing. But, you know, if you're also just doing community burns on your own property, I think, like, you know, just yeah, still having those conversations with tribal folks and, you know, learning what plants are really beneficial to different plants in the landscapes and different people in the community who might want to gather there is really good to know.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks guys. Let's go to Darcy Page, your question about creating less liability. I'll let you go ahead and pose it to the speakers.
Hey, thank you. Thank you both so much for being here and for hosting this event. I posed this question to Zeke because he was talking about the liability around having prescriptive burns. And I'm just curious what we can do maybe politically to organize around that issue, if anything.
There's been a bunch of work done on liability in the last few years, and it's good progress. There's a new state law that limits liability for people doing prescribed burns under an approved burn plan to gross negligence. So unless you're out there like drunk, throwing fireballs out of your pickup driving down the road, theoretically, if you lose control of a burn that's in your burn prescription and you have all the resources in your burn plan that you said you would have, and CAL FIRE signed your burn plan, then they won't come after you for the cost of suppression. However, if you burn down your neighbor's house, you're still on the hook for that. So I think one of the big things is just, it needs to be possible for us to get insurance. And right now, traditionally, a lot of people who did burning did it under a loggers broad form policy, that because loggers and foresters have traditionally used fire to burn slash, et cetera. That was one of the commercial policies that carried protection for burning. And now none of the people who write those policies will cover burning at all. So that would go a long way if we can get insurance. Right now, there's some work being done to create an insurance pool for people who get stuck with a bill because they burn their neighbor's house down. Another big thing is really significant at the landscape scale is that the Moonlight Fire in 2007 was started by a logging contractor, and it resulted in something like $100 million fine against Sierra Pacific Industries. Mainly, the fine was for damage to the public lands adjacent to the private land where the fire started. So that set a precedent, and now none of the major timber companies in California use fire they used to use it to burn their clear cuts and burn the slash, and there are hardly even burning slash piles now. And so it's hard to understate the impact that has had on the flammability, especially the private timberlands. Because in the past, we'd burn the slash after we did clear cuts, and that would dramatically reduce the amount of fuel. And it also made it easier to plant trees. Now they're planting through the slash basically. And we're seeing that the clear cuts are burning incredibly hot during fires. So those two things, reforming liability, where private timberlands don't feel like they're going to get taken to the cleaners if they burn on a national forest, and insurance for private burn bosses are both big things that we need to fight for.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to go to a question from Carrie. Since you asked a few, I'm just going to read this one off, and it's kind of posed, I think, more towards Vikki, but are there inherent legal protections built into burning on native land versus burning on, public land, federal land? Or is it?
inherent legal protections. I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily say like legal protections. I think that it's a little bit, I know that as far as like being able to burn on like a tribally owned land, that is often easier to accomplish, kind of like how burning on private is a little bit easier to accomplish, but there could be other tribes who have different rules, you know, because different tribal tribes that have land that they own, there might be different things there, but I don't think so right off the top of my head.
Yeah, thanks. Let's go to Lucy Blake. You've asked a couple questions, so I'll just let you kind of hop on and combine them and ask those few that you've typed in recently.
Sorry to be the woman with so many questions.
No, they're good. They're good.
Vikki and Zeke, what a great presentation. And Zeke, I love that picture you showed of the Dixie Fire and kind of showing the different severity burns and kind of the patch network. And I've seen you talk about this fire deficit on the landscape. And I think that's such an important concept, you know, and I would like to just have you talk about that just a little bit more, you know, this fact that we've got this kind of 100-year fire deficit, that now we've got, as you pointed out a minute ago, that some of these fires, you know, people look at the aggregate numbers and they say 1 million acres burned and it's terrifying, you know, but then you say, well, you know, potentially as much as 50% of fire might have been burning at a beneficial temperature. So, you know, if we could start understanding this a little bit more in terms of like, there's this fire deficit of positive fire, right? And you know, and if we could almost have like a countdown meter that, you know, we're counting down, you know, we're going to work away at that fire deficit. And even these fires that we see as being so epically awful have beneficial elements with them. And we're, as a society, as California, as a state, we can work down our fire deficit over time through beneficial wildfire coupled with forest treatment, coupled with kind of thoughtful controlled burns you guys are doing. So anyway, I'd just love to have you elaborate on that a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, just one related thing, which is to speak a little bit more about that question of where we're going to possibly be able to take these logs if all these mills are completely saturated and aren't willing to take them. You know, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is a image of the Caldor fire. You can see the basic shape of the fire. Kind of looks like a big salmon, actually, a big mouth open down here. But so the fire started, and we had an extreme weather event, and it burned up the community of Grizzly Flats and burned, I don't know, like 30,000 acres in the first day or something, or, you know, in a very short amount of time. And then it just kind of made its way in fits and spurts across the landscape over a couple of weeks that had us all totally riveted. And a lot of this is a beneficial burn. And so, you know, if you think of, there's 24 hours a day that the fire is burning. Once the fire is a certain size, we're really not stopping it. And so there's only a couple hours a day often that the conditions are really severe. If we have a big wind event that blows for 12 hours, maybe the fire burns, you know, this big chunk. But in a given day, maybe we've got 2 hours of up canyon winds in the afternoon when it's hot, and the fire like takes a run up a south facing slope. And so you see that kind of patchiness when a fire has its time to work across the landscape. You see that it, you know, it nibbles here and it really gobbles other parts. And if we're unlucky, then our communities are built in a gobbling zone. And a lot of this is knowable. And we know that fires run up canyons and downwind, and we know a lot about how winds move. And so like the Caldor fire, you know, they made a run in a place that was really predictable. And unfortunately, the ski area engineers weren't fire people, and they built a resort in this place that's got that high hazard. But like if we look at the whole landscape, we can kind of already know where these real problem areas are. But yeah, the Caldor fire, it's like a big chunk of it got kind of reset And so I think there's a lot of hand wringing about, in this era of climate change that we're going to lose everything. And this land's been really used and abused for 100 years plus. This is prime kind of gold rush country. And so we killed these forests 100 years ago, right? When we took out all the big trees and we murdered the people that tended the land. And now like we're paying the consequences now 100 years later, but we really killed this forest, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And fire's resetting that. So that's the macro. And I know the macro doesn't really help anyone who lost their home in Grizzly Flats. But, when we look at the whole landscape, climate change is doing some really bad things in these lands, like around Chester. But it's just this kind of delayed consequence of stuff we did a long time ago. And the places that are still green on here, in my opinion, are places that, hey, we've got an opportunity to actually get it right with the fire. Fire's back in its natural return interval. We've kept fire out of here for 100 years. Now this area burned and these forests are climate proofed, right? And it's on us now to get fire into them in the next 5 or 10 years, or it'll all be red. But we kind of have a choice of, taking advantage of these resets. I think my big worry with a lot of this is that the Forest Service's big emphasis right now is to cut dead trees along every road on national forests in California. And on the Dixie Fire, that's 130,000 acres that are within 300 feet of a Forest Service road. And we're so busy cutting dead trees that we're not spending any time laying out big burn units in the green forest that's left. And so like, why are we chasing, like, there's plenty of logs right now. Like, why do we need to chase every dead log and clean up the burn? Because we don't have the capability to manage the land after we clean it up. Forest Service has no capability to speak of to manage land. That's happened in my career. So we need to admit that, like, they're not going to just suddenly be the agency they once were 30 years ago, where they can get stuff done at the landscape scale, except fight fire. And so I kind of feel like we have a choice. Prescribed burning at scale is the only tool we have that's going to keep these green patches green.
Great, thanks you guys. I think we're getting low on time. There's just one other thing I was hoping that we could touch on, which is just real briefly, how does a prescribed burn association of PBA get established, or how could any of our attendees potentially pursue a prescribed burn association?
Check out calpba.org.
Okay.
Northern California Prescribed Fire Council is helping coordinate, but it's really grassroots. It doesn't need to, there's not really kind of a standard, but a lot of the RCDs, Resource Conservation Districts, are getting funding to help stand them up and to provide some coordination. But there's a lot of skill share going on. There's kind of PBA calls and Zoom calls where we're working together, working on training. One of the big things we have right now is there's a new standard for California Certified Burn Boss that would allow people like Vikki and I to become qualified by the state to lead burns without having to spend 20 years working for the Forest Service and working through their whole qualification system. And it's kind of stalled because Cal Fire isn't certifying. There's a new state law that mandated that they come up with this program, but it's kind of stalled. So the PBAs are hopefully going to help put on pressure to qualify more people like us who have a ton of burning experience, but aren't necessarily like incident commanders to help build this capacity.
Great, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna wrap us up here, I think, and hand it off to Kate. This was a super informative discussion, and we really appreciate you being here with us. And Kate, I'll let you take it.
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you to Vikki, and thank you to Zeke, and thank you for everybody for spending some time with us this evening. Obviously, this is a topic that we could talk about for a really, really long time. And so we invite you to check out what we're doing here at the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation for our Forest Futures initiative, where we are, in part, one of our initiatives in this project is to bring people together like this, to have the community come together and be able to ask questions of experts like Vikki and Zeke, who really spend so much more time than any of us do, living and breathing this. Our initiative is a large scale initiative. We are about to release some exciting news about our first round of funding that will go out. This is a project that we really hope that everybody will engage in. The next way to engage with us will be on Wednesday, February 23rd for our next salon. We're going to be working on the speakers, lining those speakers up and getting the topic dialed. So we know it's going to be another great presentation, and we just invite you to look for the invitation as you found this one in your email or over social media. There's a wonderful fire exhibit here in Truckee that we really hope that you guys will check out. Caroline just put some information about that in the chat. I think that the more that all of us can learn about and become comfortable with the fact of fire in our lives, the better we will all be as we work together to help to prevent the ways in which fire can be most devastatingly destructive. But there's also obviously a lot of benefit to it, which we learned about tonight. There's a survey link in the chat. We hope that you will send your thoughts to us. We'd love to hear what you would be interested in learning about, and maybe we can bring that to one of our upcoming salons. We hope to see you on February 23rd. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.